Millionaire hired his maid for his ex-fiancée's wedding, and what she did shocked everyone. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The wedding bells were already echoing across the grand St. Augustine Cathedral. Chandeliers dripped light like liquid gold, violins whispered through the air, and a crowd of the city's wealthiest whispered behind jeweled hands. Every camera turned when Alex Montgomery, the cold-eyed millionaire once destined to marry the bride, walked through the doors. But it wasn't just his presence that froze the room. It was the woman at his side. She wore a borrowed navy dress that fit just a little awkwardly at the shoulders, shoes that pinched with every step, and hands clutching a tiny purse as though it were a shield. Emma Carter, housemaid of the Montgomery estate. The same woman guests had seen carrying laundry baskets down the service hallways. Tonight, she was on his arm. Gasps rippled like a storm through the pews. "Is that his maid?" one voice hissed. "He brought a servant to the wedding?" Another sneered. Alex ignored them all. His jaw was set, his gaze straight ahead, the perfect mask of arrogance. Yet under the polished marble of his expression, a storm brewed. He hadn't wanted to come here alone, and he certainly hadn't expected Emma to accept his offer, his command, really. Emma, for her part, felt the cathedral's eyes like knives against her back. Her palms dampened, her pulse drummed in her throat. One step at a time, she whispered to herself. She had faced worse. Empty refrigerators, overdue rent notices, nights scrubbing tile until her fingers bled. This was just another battlefield, only dressed in silk and champagne. They reached the front rows, where Alex's ex-fiancée, Caroline Whitmore, flawless in white lace, turned to look at them. Her smile faltered, then curled into a blade. "Alex," she breathed, her voice dipped in honey and venom. "And your date?" She let the pause hang in the air like a guillotine. Laughter stirred among the guests closest to her. Emma felt her stomach knot, but she held her chin steady. Alex slid his hand slightly over hers. Not tender, not romantic, but a warning. "Hold your ground." Emma's breath caught. She wasn't sure whether to resent him or lean into the silent protection. The priest called for silence, but the whispers didn't die. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled in the back row. Caroline's mother, seated near the altar, covered her mouth to disguise a smirk. Emma forced herself to inhale slowly, smoothing the skirt over her knees. She remembered Alex's words before they left the mansion. "You don't have to impress anyone, just survive the night." But survival, Emma realized, meant more than keeping her balance in heels. It meant standing under the crushing weight of judgment and refusing to break. She caught her reflection in the polished marble floor. For a moment she saw not a maid, but a woman who had carried burdens heavier than crystal chandeliers, who had faced storms harsher than whispered cruelty. Her lips tightened. She could endure this. The music swelled. The bride turned toward the aisle, and the room shifted its attention. Yet the murmurs about Alex and his maid refused to vanish. They clung like smoke, feeding on every stolen glance. Alex remained still, his posture carved from stone. Only his eyes betrayed a flicker when he turned and saw Emma's steady gaze fixed forward, unblinking. Something unexpected stirred in him. And what happened in the next moment when Emma dared to speak aloud left the entire cathedral silent. The room was silent for half a breath too long, the kind of silence that prickled across skin. Emma hadn't meant to speak. The words had slipped out soft, steady, but clear enough to travel through the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. "It's a beautiful wedding," she said, her voice calm despite the heat in her chest. "A celebration of promises, and maybe second chances." Every head turned. Caroline blinked, her painted smile stiffening. A few guests chuckled, uncertain whether the maid was naive or bold. But Emma didn't shrink. She lowered herself gracefully into her seat beside Alex, as if she belonged there. Alex's lips curved barely a fraction, but enough. "Not bad," he murmured under his breath. "Not bad at all." "Oh?" Emma didn't answer. Her fingers were still trembling inside her purse, but she refused to let anyone see. She lifted her chin, eyes fixed on the altar as the ceremony began. The priest's voice filled the hall, but Emma only half heard. She was too aware of Caroline's sharp gaze flickering toward her, too aware of the whispers behind. She's just the help. He must be desperate. This is humiliating. Emma pressed her palms together, as though in prayer. If humiliation was the price, she would pay it. She'd endured worse from life itself. When the vows ended and the applause rippled through the hall, Alex leaned toward her. Now comes the reception. That's where the real war starts. Emma shot him a sideways glance. You dragged me into this war, remember? And you walked in with your head high, he replied. That's more than most could do. The words almost sounded like praise, but Alex's tone remained cool, unreadable. He stood, offering his arm again. Cameras clicked instantly. Emma slipped her hand onto his sleeve, steady this time, and they walked toward the grand ballroom. The reception was a glittering storm of crystal glasses and laughter sharp as glass. Gold drapes shimmered, chandeliers burned, and waiters carried trays of champagne. At the center, Caroline reigned like a queen, her new husband at her side. She was waiting. Alex, she purred when he approached, her smile the perfect mask. Then her eyes cut toward Emma. And your companion. She let the last word drip with disdain. I suppose everyone deserves company. A ripple of laughter broke across the circle of socialites. Emma felt the sting, but before Alex could respond, she spoke. I'm honored to be here, she said, her tone polite but firm. It's rare to witness love celebrated so publicly. I only hope it's as real behind closed doors. The laughter stopped. Caroline's smile cracked for a fraction of a second. The men around her coughed awkwardly into their glasses. Alex's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected Emma to strike back, and certainly not with elegance. Caroline recovered quickly. How refreshing, she replied, her voice brittle. Tell me, Alex, does your maid always double as your philosopher? Emma's pulse thundered. She wanted to shrink, but she forced her voice steady. Only when someone underestimates her. The circle froze again. Alex's eyes flicked to her, and for once, his mask slipped. There was a spark of admiration, almost pride. Caroline's mother swooped in, her pearls glinting under the lights. How unconventional. Bringing the staff as a date. Quite the statement. Emma met her eyes, calm as stone. Sometimes, statements speak louder than diamonds. The older woman gasped softly, but no retort came. Around them, the whispers shifted. Some mocking, some curious, a few impressed. Alex leaned closer, his voice low enough for only Emma. Careful, he said. You're playing with fire. Emma's lips curved faintly. Then maybe it's time someone else felt the heat. For the first time that evening, Alex's cold composure cracked. He hid it behind a sip of champagne, but his eyes betrayed him. Emma wasn't just surviving the night. She was rewriting it. And as the music swelled and Caroline called for the first dance, Alex realized something dangerous. His maid wasn't simply holding her ground. She was stealing the spotlight. The orchestra struck its first notes, strings bright and commanding, as Caroline and her new husband floated into the center of the ballroom. Applause rose, but Emma felt the sound like a wave pressing her back against the wall. She stood beside Alex, who clapped politely, expression as cold as marble. Don't wander off, he murmured without looking at her. Emma swallowed, fingers tightening on her purse. Not exactly blending in anyway. Exactly, he said, and finally turned toward her. His eyes swept over her dress, the way it pinched slightly at the waist, the shoes that had already rubbed blisters on her heels. You're drawing more attention than you realize. Emma felt heat climb her cheeks. Because I don't belong here. Because you don't bow, he corrected, then turned back to the floor. Caroline spun gracefully, every move a performance. The crowd adored her. But when her gaze found Alex, her smile sharpened. She tilted her head toward Emma, lips curling in challenge, as if to say, this is the best you could do? Emma inhaled slowly. She had promised herself she would survive this night, not crumble under stares. Yet the weight was heavier now, pressing into her bones. When the song ended, waiters poured through the crowd with champagne. Caroline, radiant and merciless, raised her glass. To love, she declared, and to honesty. Her eyes lingered on Alex, qualities some never learned. The guests laughed knowingly. Alex's jaw flexed, but he didn't rise to the bait. Emma, however, felt her chest tighten. The humiliation wasn't aimed at her, yet somehow it was. Without thinking, she lifted her own glass. "Then here's to those who find love, even after betrayal," she said clearly, "because true love doesn't need cruelty to prove itself." The laughter stopped. Silence cut across the room sharper than crystal breaking. Caroline froze mid-smile. A murmur rippled, some scandalized, some delighted. Alex turned, eyes narrowed. "Emma," he hissed under his breath. But Emma didn't back down. She sipped the champagne calmly, setting her glass down with steady fingers. Her heart raced, but her voice had not trembled. Caroline recovered quickly, clapping her hands as if Emma's words were nothing more than entertainment. "How poetic," she said sweetly. "Perhaps your maid should consider a career on stage." "She already has an audience," a guest muttered, and several chuckled. Emma lowered her gaze, but not in shame. She had struck a nerve, and she knew it. Alex leaned in close, his whisper sharp. "You're reckless." Emma met his eyes. "You said survive. This is how I survive." He stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Then he straightened, masking it all again. The evening marched forward. Couples filled the dance floor, laughter returning like nothing had happened. But the tension around Alex and Emma clung like smoke. Caroline made her rounds, radiant and flawless, yet her eyes kept darting toward them. Later, when Alex stepped away to speak with an investor, Emma found herself momentarily alone by the dessert table. She breathed, shoulders sagging for the first time all night. She reached for a glass of water, grateful for something plain. "Brave words," a voice said at her side. Emma turned to find an older gentleman, silver hair, sharp eyes. Not many in this room dare to speak against Caroline. Emma offered a polite smile. "Maybe they should." He chuckled. "Alex Montgomery doesn't bring anyone here by accident. You're different. I see it." Before Emma could answer, Caroline appeared at her elbow. "Different indeed," she said smoothly. "Different enough to be misplaced." Emma stiffened, but the older man excused himself quickly. Caroline leaned closer, her perfume thick as roses. "Enjoy your moment, darling. It won't last." Emma held her stare. "Neither do masks." Caroline's smile faltered, just for a second. Then she glided away, silk trailing behind her like smoke. Emma exhaled, clutching her glass tighter. She had crossed another line tonight, and she knew it. But when Alex returned, his eyes locked on her with something she hadn't seen before, curiosity mixed with a dangerous hint of respect. And that look told her the night was far from over. The ballroom swirled with chatter, silver trays passing between sequin gowns and polished tuxedos. But Emma felt every glance like a spotlight. She clutched her glass tighter, pretending interest in the towering cake at the center of the room. Her shoes pinched harder with every step, but she refused to take them off. "Not here. Not tonight." Alex rejoined her, sliding a hand lightly against her elbow. To others it looked like a casual gesture, but Emma knew it was control. "Stay close," he muttered. "I'm not running away," she replied, though her voice trembled just enough to betray her nerves. "You're not invisible either," he said, scanning the crowd. "Half the room is watching to see if you trip." Emma exhaled. "Then I'll give them something else to see." His eyes flicked to her, surprised. But before he could answer, a voice called out. "Alex!" Caroline's father, Senator Whitmore, boomed as he strode across the marble floor. The crowd parted for him. Power moved that way. His handshake was firm, his smile tight. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. Brave of you to come." "Oh." Alex's jaw flexed, but his voice was smooth. "Wouldn't miss such an important day." The senator's gaze drifted to Emma. He looked her up and down slowly, as though appraising a servant at an auction. And this must be entertainment. Emma felt heat flood her chest. Before she could stop herself, she said, "No, sir. I'm his guest." The senator chuckled, shaking his head as if she were a child playing dress-up. "Remarkable. Alex, really dragging your help into polite society?" Whispers spread instantly. Emma's grip on her glass faltered, but she steadied it before it slipped. Her heart thundered. She wanted to shrink into the floor, yet something inside her wouldn't bend. Alex's silence cut like a blade. He didn't defend her. Not a word. Emma's throat tightened. "Excuse me," she whispered, slipping away before he could stop her. She pushed through the glittering crowd, past the laughter and champagne, until she found herself near the edge of the ballroom, where a row of tall windows overlooked the city lights. The night air pressed cold against the glass. She braced her hands on the sill, blinking back the sting in her eyes. Behind her, footsteps. She knew them already. "Emma," Alex's voice was low, almost cautious. She didn't turn. "You let them laugh at me." "I couldn't escalate," he said. "Not here. Not tonight." She faced him then, eyes blazing. "Do you know what it feels like to stand in a room full of people who see you as less than human? To be paraded as some kind of statement, when all you wanted was a paycheck?" Alex flinched, not visibly, but enough that she caught it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no quick retort. Emma's breath shook. "You hired me to play a role, but I'm not a prop. I won't be humiliated for your pride." The silence between them stretched. Finally, Alex said quietly, "You're right." She blinked, startled. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I miscalculated. I thought bringing you here would wound Caroline, prove I'd moved on. I didn't think about what it would cost you." Emma studied him, suspicion and disbelief warring in her chest. His eyes, usually steel and ice, looked almost human. Almost? Before she could reply, the ballroom erupted in applause. A microphone squealed at the far end of the room. The master of ceremonies smiled broadly. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with tonight's celebration, we'd like to invite a few words from our distinguished guests." Emma's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming before he even said it. "Mr. Montgomery," the MC continued, "and his lovely companion, please, share a toast." The spotlight turned. The crowd's eyes pinned them both in place. Emma froze. Alex's gaze flickered toward her. For once, there was no command in it. Only a question. Emma's pulse raced. She could feel the weight of the room, the sneers waiting, the judgment curling like smoke. Her lips parted, and a single thought burned in her mind. "If I speak, I may never be invisible again." And still, she reached for the microphone. Emma's hand tightened around the microphone, her knuckles pale against the polished silver. The ballroom quieted, curious eyes gleaming from every corner. She could almost hear her own pulse over the hum of the chandeliers. Alex stood beside her, his posture a wall of calm arrogance. But Emma knew he was watching, waiting to see if she would break. She drew a breath. "To love," she began, her voice soft but steady. "To love that is not measured by wealth or power, but by how it treats the smallest of us. Because true love doesn't humiliate, it protects." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone coughed, another shifted uneasily. Emma's words had sliced through the gilded air like glass shattering on marble. Caroline's painted smile faltered. "How touching," she said loudly, forcing a laugh. "A fairy tale from the Maid's corner of the world." Emma met her eyes, calm and unflinching. "Maybe so. But sometimes fairy tales remind us of what real love should look like." Gasps. A few chuckles, even scattered applause from the far tables. Alex's gaze flicked toward her, unreadable, but his lips pressed tight as if to hide something approval, maybe. The MC, clearly unsettled, clapped his hands. "Wonderful. Thank you both." He ushered them back toward their table, but the damage was done. Emma had changed the tone of the night. When they sat, Emma exhaled, her hands trembling under the tablecloth. Alex leaned close. "You have no idea what you just did." "I told the truth," she whispered. "You challenged the Whitmores in their own ballroom," he said, almost incredulous. "That's not survival, that's war." Emma met his stare. "Maybe it's time someone fought back." For the first time all evening, Alex laughed, quiet, low, but real. It startled her more than the glares around the room. Dinner was served, but conversation buzzed louder than silverware. Guests leaned in, whispering, some glancing at Emma with disdain, others with something closer to intrigue. She ate little, too aware of the attention, but she sat straighter now, refusing to shrink. Across the room, Caroline's mother whispered furiously in the senator's ear. Caroline herself smiled through gritted teeth, sipping champagne as though it could wash away humiliation. After dessert, music swelled again. Couples drifted back to the dance floor. Alex rose, offering Emma his hand. She blinked. "You can't be serious." "Completely." His tone was smooth, but his eyes gleamed. "If they want a show, let's give them one." Every instinct told her to refuse. Her shoes hurt. Her pride hurt worse, and yet something stronger pushed her forward. She placed her hand in his. The crowd parted as they stepped onto the polished floor. Murmurs rippled, cameras discreetly lifted. Alex pulled her close, guiding her with practiced precision. Emma stumbled at first, but his grip steadied her. "Relax," he murmured. "Follow my lead." She clenched her jaw. "I clean floors, not dance on them." "Tonight you do both," he said, the faintest smirk playing at his mouth. The orchestra swelled. Step by step, Emma adjusted, her movements smoothing, her head lifting. The room blurred at the edges until there was only the music, the floor, and Alex's hand steady on her back. When the song ended, silence hung for half a second. Then applause. Polite, reluctant, but real. Emma's chest heaved. She met Alex's eyes, searching, but whatever flickered their admiration, curiosity was gone in an instant, hidden behind his mask once again. As they left the floor, Caroline intercepted them, her voice sweet as poison. "Impressive," she said, her smile thin. "For a maid." Emma held her gaze, lips curving faintly. "And yet, here we are, sharing the same floor." Caroline's smile shattered. For the first time that night, she had no words. And Emma realized with a jolt she hadn't just survived the evening. She had turned it upside down. The applause faded, replaced by whispers that clung to Emma like perfume too strong to escape. She felt every pair of eyes follow her as Alex guided her back to their table. His hand never left her back, steady and protective, in a way that confused her more than it comforted. "You've officially set the ballroom on fire," he murmured, pulling out her chair. Emma sat, her pulse still racing from the dance. "I didn't mean to." Yes, you did," Alex said, settling beside her. His tone wasn't accusing, it was almost admiring. "And you did it well." Before Emma could answer, a woman in emerald silk approached their table. She was tall, poised, with the air of someone who'd spent her life at the center of power. Caroline's aunt. "What a spectacle," the woman said, her smile sharp. "I must say, Alex, you've surprised us all. I didn't realize the Montgomery estate offered such versatile staff." "Oh?" Emma's stomach twisted, but before Alex could respond, she spoke. "And I didn't realize wealth excused cruelty. We all learned something new tonight." The woman's smile faltered, and for a beat, silence stretched. Then she laughed, brittle and cold, before gliding away. Emma lowered her gaze, her hand tightening around her napkin. "Maybe I should stop talking." Alex leaned closer, his voice low. "Don't. They're rattled. That's more satisfying than silence." She blinked at him. For once, the distance in his eyes had thinned, replaced by something sharper, more human. The night pressed on. Waiters cleared plates, fresh champagne poured. But Emma felt the tension growing, a storm waiting to break. And it broke when Caroline herself stood, tapping her glass with a spoon. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her smile radiant, but her eyes knives. "I think it's time we acknowledge tonight's most unusual guest." She gestured toward Emma. "Would you care to share a few words, dear? Tell us about yourself. We're dying to know." A hush fell. Guests turned eagerly, expecting a stumble, a humiliation. Emma's heart pounded, her throat dry. She looked at Alex, his face unreadable, yet his hand slid over hers under the table. "A signal. It's your choice." Emma rose slowly. The room tilted, but she held her ground. She lifted her glass again, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I'm Emma Carter," she said, her voice carrying. "Yes, I work for the Montgomery estate. I clean floors, I polish glass, I fold linen, but I also know that dignity doesn't depend on money, and love isn't proven by diamond carats or guest lists." Gasps fluttered. Caroline's smile stiffened, her knuckles whitening around her glass. Emma continued, her voice stronger now. "I came here tonight expecting to hide in the shadows. But instead, I was reminded that sometimes, even in the grandest rooms, the simplest truths are the hardest to ignore." Silence. Then, Slowly, applause. Scattered at first, then building. Not everyone clapped, but enough to shift the air. Enough to sting Caroline's pride. Emma lowered her glass, her chest tight but her eyes unflinching. She sat again, and Alex looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You just did what an entire boardroom of lawyers couldn't," he said quietly. "You silenced them." Emma allowed herself a small, tired smile. Maybe silence is overdue. Oh, but as Caroline's eyes burned across the room, Emma knew this battle was far from over, and the war was only beginning. The applause lingered like smoke, stubborn and heavy. Emma sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, pulse still racing, every nerve alive. Around her, the glittering crowd buzzed, some intrigued, some scandalized. But Caroline's face, pale beneath the powder, told the truth. Emma had struck harder than anyone expected. Alex leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually, but his eyes never left Emma. "You just humiliated Chicago's most ruthless family," he murmured. "And you didn't even flinch." Emma's lips curved faintly. "I was already humiliated the moment I walked in. Everything since then is just noise." He studied her, long enough to unsettle her. There was something new in his gaze, not just curiosity. Respect. Dangerous respect. Before Emma could speak again, Caroline's mother rose from her table, pearls glinting under the chandelier. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying, "let's not be distracted from tonight's purpose. We are here to celebrate love. Real love. Not performances." Her eyes cut like knives toward Emma. The room shifted, uncomfortable laughter bubbling. Emma felt the familiar burn in her chest, the ache of being measured and dismissed. She looked down, but Alex leaned close, voice low. "Don't let them win. Not tonight." His words startled her. They sounded less like an order, more like belief. Moments later, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. Alex took two, passing one to Emma. "If they want a performance," he said softly, "let's give them the kind they won't forget." Before she could ask what he meant, Alex rose, pulling her with him. Heads turned instantly, cameras flashing. He clinked his glass against hers, his voice smooth and commanding as he addressed the crowd. "To the newlyweds," he began, "may your happiness last longer than your patience." Polite laughter scattered. Then, without warning, he turned toward Emma. "And to those who remind us that strength doesn't come from privilege, but from resilience." Emma froze, heat rushing to her cheeks. The room erupted gasps, whispers, flashes of light. Caroline's glass shattered against the table with a sharp crack. Emma wanted to disappear, but Alex's grip tightened at her waist, steadying her. She forced herself to lift her chin, meeting the storm of eyes with quiet defiance. Later, when the music resumed and couples drifted back to the floor, Emma slipped away to catch her breath near the balcony doors. The night air beyond the glass called to her, cooler than the suffocating ballroom. She pushed the door open and stepped outside. The city spread beneath her, a tapestry of lights. She leaned on the railing, letting the chill soothe her burning skin. For a moment, she could almost forget the stares, the whispers. Footsteps followed. Alex again. "You shouldn't be alone," he said, his tone softer than before. Emma glanced at him. "I've been alone most of my life. I'll manage." He moved beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the skyline. "You're braver than anyone in there. Do you know that?" Emma shook her head, a bitter smile tugging her lips. I'm just tired of being small." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the city below. Then Alex turned, his eyes locking on hers. "Emma, tonight, you changed the story. Not just mine. Theirs. Maybe even your own." Her breath caught. For once, she didn't know what to say. But before she could answer, the balcony doors burst open. Caroline stood there, her gown glowing under the golden light, her eyes blazing with fury. "Well," she spat, her voice trembling, "isn't this cozy?" Emma's heart pounded. The war had just walked onto the balcony. Caroline's heels clicked sharply against the stone balcony as she advanced, her gown trailing like smoke behind her. The fury in her eyes didn't match the polite smile she pasted on for any stragglers who might be watching through the glass doors. "Well, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with venom masked as silk, "I suppose this is what you've reduced yourself to, whispering with the help at my wedding." Emma stiffened, the words cutting deep, but Alex didn't flinch. He stood tall, his hands still in his pockets, gaze steady. "Congratulations again, Caroline. You've outdone yourself." "Don't patronize me," she snapped, her mask slipping. She turned her gaze on Emma. "And you, do you think this little act makes you his equal? You'll always be the girl scrubbing floors in someone else's house." The air grew heavy. Emma's heart pounded, but she forced herself to hold Caroline's stare. "At least I've never needed to step on others to feel tall." Caroline's jaw clenched. For a moment, Emma thought she might strike her. Instead, Caroline's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Do you know why Alex brought you here? Because you're disposable. A shield. When tonight is over, you'll go back to your mop, and he'll forget you existed." Emma faltered, her chest tightening. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Alex's voice broke the silence. "Enough." His tone was sharp, final. "You've had your fun parading your perfect life, but you don't get to insult her." Caroline laughed, bitter and loud. "Look at you, defending a maid. Do you think anyone in that ballroom takes you seriously now? They're laughing at you, Alex. At both of you." "Oh." He stepped closer, his voice low but cutting. "If they're laughing, it's because you've given them nothing real to admire." Caroline's breath hitched, fury sparking in her eyes. But she didn't respond. She spun on her heel, storming back inside, the doors slamming behind her. Silence returned to the balcony. Emma stared at the ground, trying to process the storm that had just passed. "She's right," Emma whispered at last. "I don't belong here. After tonight, this will all vanish." Alex turned to her, his expression softer now. "Maybe. Or maybe tonight was the first time you were truly seen." Emma shook her head, blinking back heat in her eyes. "Seen as what? A joke? A prop?" "No," Alex said firmly. "As someone who refuses to bow." The words unsettled her. She hugged her arms around herself, torn between defiance and the ache of truth. From inside, the music swelled again. Laughter rose, glasses clinked. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. But Emma knew the whispers would spread, faster than champagne on silk. By morning, her name, her face would not just be invisible Maid Emma Carter. It would be the scandal whispered about in every drawing room. Alex watched her, his jaw tight. "You don't deserve this. If you want to leave, I'll have my driver take you home." Emma looked up at him, something raw flickering in her eyes. "And let them win? Number I'll walk back in. With or without you." "No." She turned, her back straight, her hands steady now. She pushed open the balcony doors and stepped into the ballroom once more, the noise crashing over her like a wave. Alex followed, his gaze fixed on her, and as the crowd's eyes turned again, Emma realized the night had shifted. She was no longer just surviving it. She was owning it. The ballroom quieted the moment Emma stepped back inside. She could feel the weight of the stairs pressing against her skin, but this time she didn't shrink. She lifted her chin, smoothed the skirt of the borrowed dress, and walked forward as though the marble floor belonged to her. Alex followed a step behind, his presence like a shadow, steady and watchful. The crowd parted subtly, whispers curling around them like smoke. "Is she really? Montgomery's maid. Unbelievable." Emma let the words roll off her shoulders. They weren't daggers anymore, they were background noise. Caroline stood near the stage with her new husband, laughter a little too loud, smile a little too sharp. When she caught sight of Emma returning, her lips tightened. She hadn't expected Emma to come back. The master of ceremonies, sensing tension, tried to smooth things over. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the couple's first toast together as husband and wife." Caroline raised her glass high, her eyes never leaving Emma. "To a future filled with love, loyalty, and—" She paused deliberately. "Class." Laughter rippled. Emma's cheeks burned. But before she could sit down, Alex stood beside her, his glass lifted. His voice cut clean through the room. "And to courage," he said. "Because sometimes the bravest person in the room isn't the one in the gown or the tuxedo. It's the one everyone underestimates." The room stilled. Caroline's smile shattered for a heartbeat before she recovered, clinking her glass loudly to mask the silence. But the damage was done. The crowd shifted. Some whispered in disdain, but others were clapping. Emma blinked, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected him to defend her. Not like that. As the toast ended, waiters began serving dessert. Emma sat, her hands trembling under the tablecloth. Alex leaned close, his tone low enough only she could hear. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I wasn't going to," she replied, but her voice betrayed her, softer than she intended. He smirked faintly, then reached for his wine. Across the room, Caroline seethed. Her aunt leaned in, whispering furiously, while Caroline's mother glared daggers in Emma's direction. Emma knew she hadn't won the war, but she had shifted the battlefield. Minutes later, a journalist from the Society Press approached, notebook in hand. "Mr. Montgomery," she said sweetly, "your companion has captivated quite a stir tonight. Might we ask her a few questions?" Emma froze. Alex started to refuse, but Emma placed a hand on his arm. "It's fine," she said quietly. The reporter smiled at her. "Miss Carter, is it? Tell us, how does a maid from the Montgomery estate end up at the Whitmore wedding, on the arm of one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors?" Gasps circled again. Emma felt her stomach twist. Every instinct told her to run, to stay silent. But she heard Alex's earlier words echoing in her mind. "Don't let them win." So she straightened her shoulders and answered, her voice clear. "I'm here because I was asked, but I stayed because I refused to let anyone tell me I don't belong." The reporter's pen scratched quickly, eyebrows rising. Around them, murmurs swelled louder. Alex looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. She hadn't just survived the question, she'd owned it. The journalist nodded politely, retreating. But Emma knew the story would spread by morning. She would no longer be invisible. She would be scandal, headlines, whispers across the city. She sat back down, her heart hammering. Alex leaned in again. "You realize what you've done?" Emma met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, and I don't regret it." For the first time all evening, Alex smiled, not the cold smirk he wore like armor, but something real. And across the ballroom, Caroline watched, her fists clenched around her champagne flute. This was no longer just her wedding. It had become Emma's battleground. The music softened as dessert was served, but the air inside the ballroom felt heavy, stretched thin like glass about to crack. Emma sat with her fork untouched, her gaze lowered, though she could feel the currents of conversation sweeping around her. Every word seemed to carry her name. Did you hear what she said? A maid speaking like that? Alex Montgomery must have lost his mind. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. She had chosen this. She had refused to bow, but the weight of it still pressed deep into her bones. Across the table, Alex studied her quietly. He noticed the way her hands tightened around her napkin, the way her shoulders squared as if fighting to stay upright. Without warning, he set down his glass and leaned close. "You've already won tonight," he murmured. Emma blinked, startled. "It doesn't feel like winning." "That's because winning usually feels like surviving until later." His tone softened. "Trust me." "I know." She looked at him, searching his face for mockery. But there was none. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw no mask. Just exhaustion that matched her own. Before she could answer, the microphone squealed again. Caroline's voice floated through the speakers, deceptively sweet. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we open the floor for the evening dance, I'd like to extend a special thanks to all of our guests of honor." Her gaze cut toward Emma. "Particularly those who joined us from less expected stations." The crowd chuckled uneasily. Caroline's smile widened. "In fact, why don't we make this night even more memorable? A little entertainment." Emma's stomach sank. She recognized the glint in Caroline's eyes. "Miss Carter," Caroline called, her voice like a whip, "since you've graced us with your words tonight, perhaps you'd honor us further with a dance. Alone. Show us the confidence you speak of." Gasps rippled. Emma froze, her throat tight. This wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. Caroline wanted her to stumble, to be humiliated under the chandeliers. Alex rose instantly. "Enough, Caroline." "Oh, don't be dull," she replied smoothly. "Surely the maid can handle a waltz on her own? Or is your confidence in her only for speeches?" Eyes turned, cameras lifted discreetly. Emma's palms dampened, her breath uneven. She wanted to refuse, but refusing would mean bowing, and she had already promised herself she wouldn't. Before she could move, Alex extended his hand. "She doesn't dance alone," he said, his voice firm, carrying across the room. Caroline's smile thinned, but the trap had already been sprung. The orchestra struck the first notes. The crowd watched, hungry for spectacle. Emma placed her hand in Alex's, her heart thundering. He guided her onto the polished floor once more, their steps falling into rhythm. She stumbled on the turn, but his grip steadied her. "Eyes on me," he whispered. "Forget them." She did. For a moment, the ballroom blurred again, leaving only the music, the steps, and the man leading her through the storm. When the song ended, silence crashed down, then applause. Louder this time. Not polite, not forced. Real. Emma's chest heaved. She stood tall, refusing to look away from Caroline, and Caroline, still frozen by the stage, realized her plan had failed. Worse, her rival had turned humiliation into triumph. Emma lowered her hand from Alex's arm, but his eyes lingered on her, unreadable, yet burning with something new. And in that moment, Emma understood. She wasn't just surviving Alex's scheme anymore. She was reshaping it. The applause still echoed when Emma and Alex stepped off the dance floor. Emma's pulse hadn't slowed, but her steps were steady now, each one heavier with the weight of what she'd just done. She had walked into a trap and walked out with dignity intact, but Caroline was far from finished. Near the head table, Caroline leaned toward her mother, whispering furiously. Pearls clicked against the glass stem she gripped too tightly. Guests watched the exchange with nervous curiosity, waiting for the next strike. Emma pretended not to notice, but her stomach tightened. She sank into her chair, drawing a breath, her hand brushing against the rim of her glass of water. Alex sat beside her, his composure as perfect as ever, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, remained locked on her face. "You shouldn't have survived that," he murmured. Emma gave a faint smile, though her throat was dry. "Then maybe I'm getting good at breaking rules." For the first time, Alex laughed softly. "Or maybe you were never meant to follow them." Before Emma could reply, Caroline's voice rang out again, sharp as crystal breaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her smile too wide, "our dear Alex Montgomery has always loved theatrics. Tonight, he has truly outdone himself." Emma's skin prickled. The tone wasn't admiration, it was venom disguised as charm. Caroline lifted a hand. A waiter appeared at once, carrying a silver tray with an envelope resting on top. She plucked it up and waved it lightly. "Of course, some of us know secrets, and secrets have a way of surfacing." The room hushed. Emma's chest tightened. Caroline unfolded the envelope with exaggerated grace. "Did you all know that this dazzling lady at Alex's side tonight is, in fact, his maid? The very one scrubbing floors at the Montgomery estate just this morning?" Gasps spread like wildfire. Some guests laughed openly. Others leaned closer, hungry for scandal. Emma's face flushed hot. Her secret, if it could be called, that was no longer whispered. It had been flung under the chandeliers for everyone to see. Caroline's smile glittered. "Tell us, Emma, how does it feel to wear silk one night and an apron the next?" Emma's throat ached. Her hands trembled under the table. For a moment, silence felt safer than words. But then she remembered Alex's earlier whisper, "Don't let them win." She rose slowly. The murmurs grew louder. "I feel proud," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "Because my work is honest. Because I've earned everything I have, even when it's little. Can all of you say the same?" The ballroom froze. Some mouths hung open. A few clapped quietly at first, then stronger. Caroline's expression cracked, the smile slipping from her painted face. Emma lowered her gaze just long enough to sit again, her heart hammering, but her chin lifted. Alex leaned toward her, voice low but charged. "You just did what I couldn't." Emma frowned, confused. "What's that?" "Shut them up without raising your voice." For once, Alex's mask dropped. His eyes held not arrogance, but something startlingly close to admiration. And Emma, breath still shaking, realized that the battle she feared most being exposed had just become her greatest weapon. The applause that followed Emma's words was uneven, scattered, but it was enough to shift the air in the ballroom. For the first time that night, Caroline's control cracked. She stood frozen with the envelope still in her hand, her lips trembling around a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Emma lowered herself back into her chair, her chest tight but her face calm. She wasn't sure if her legs would have carried her any longer. Alex sat beside her, his gaze steady on her profile, as if memorizing the exact second she turned the room in her favor. "You're full of surprises," he murmured. Emma didn't look at him. "I'm just tired of being invisible." Caroline's mother stood abruptly, her pearls rattling against her dress. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "This is a wedding, not a charity event." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. No one applauded this time. Some guests dropped their eyes to their plates. Others whispered behind hands. Emma felt their judgment, but she also sensed something else, now curiosity, maybe even respect. Caroline, desperate to reclaim the room, raised her glass high again. "To appearances," she said, her voice brittle. "Because without them, what are we really?" Emma exhaled slowly, ready to sink into silence. But Alex rose instead. His glass gleamed in the chandelier's glow. "To truth," he countered, his tone sharp, "because without it, appearances are nothing." The room erupted, some laughed nervously, others clapped, and a few cheered openly. Caroline's face blanched, her perfect mask fracturing. Emma's heart thudded. She hadn't expected him to step in. Not like this. As the orchestra struck up another song to cut the tension, Emma excused herself. She slipped through the ballroom doors, into a quieter corridor lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors, staring down with painted superiority. She pressed her back to the wall, sucking in a shaky breath. Her hands trembled. Her body still hummed with adrenaline, but the weight of what had just happened crashed over her like cold water. "What have I done?" she thought. "Tomorrow, I won't just be a maid. I'll be a scandal." She heard footsteps and braced herself, expecting another Whitmore ready to sneer. But it was Alex. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said softly. Emma shook her head. "You shouldn't have defended me. Now they'll come after you, too." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Let them. They've been coming after me for years. I've never seen them so rattled." Emma laughed bitterly. "I'm not your weapon, Alex. I didn't ask to be part of your war." His gaze locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. "You're not a weapon. You're the only person in that room who spoke with honesty. That terrifies them." Her throat tightened. "And what about you? Does it terrify you?" For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavier than the whispers inside the ballroom. Finally, he said, "It makes me remember what matters." Emma's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but she'd spent too long surviving to trust words alone. The corridor door swung open again. Caroline appeared, her gown sweeping like a storm. Her voice was low, venom laced with triumph. "Enjoy your moment, Emma, because when the night is over, you'll be nothing more than a headline, and Alex will be a fool who dragged a maid into society." Emma's hands curled into fists at her sides. But this time, before she could respond, Alex spoke. "Careful, Caroline," he said coldly, "because the only fool tonight is the one who underestimated her." Caroline froze, her face pale, and Emma realized, with a rush of disbelief, that Alex Montgomery had chosen her side in front of the very woman who once broke him. For the first time, she wasn't sure who was protecting whom. Caroline's face stiffened, her manicured hand clutching the folds of her gown so tightly the silk threatened to tear. She had expected Emma to fold, to shrink back into silence, but instead she found Alex standing beside her maid, shielding her in front of the entire Whitmore dynasty. Her lips curled. "So this is it then? You've truly lost your mind, Alex? Throwing away your reputation for a servant?" Alex didn't blink. "It's not reputation I'm interested in anymore." The corridor grew quiet. Emma's pulse thudded painfully, her breath shallow. His words weren't meant for her, she told herself. They were meant to sting Caroline, but still, they landed heavy in her chest. Caroline scoffed, her laughter sharp and hollow. "You'll regret this." With a swirl of silk, she stormed back into the ballroom, the echo of her heels fading. Silence lingered. Emma finally spoke, her voice tight. "You shouldn't have said that." Alex turned to her. "Why not?" "Because now they'll come after you harder, and I'm not worth that." His eyes searched hers. "Emma, you've already proven you're worth more than every person in that room combined." She shook her head, heat rising in her cheeks. "Don't Don't say things you don't mean. But Alex didn't look away. I mean every word. Her chest tightened, and she forced herself to step back. The distance between them felt safer. This isn't real, Alex. Tonight, all of this, it's an act. Maybe it started that way, he admitted quietly. But it doesn't feel like an act anymore. Emma's breath caught, but before she could reply, the ballroom doors opened again. A cluster of guests spilled into the corridor, their voices carrying. There she is, one whispered. The maid. Unbelievable. He's parroting her like a prize. Emma's stomach twisted. She turned, ready to escape down the hall, but Alex caught her wrist gently. Stay, he said. His voice wasn't commanding this time, it was almost pleading. I can't keep being a spectacle, she whispered. You're not the spectacle, Emma, he said firmly. They are. They're terrified of what you represent. What's that? She asked bitterly. Truth. The word silenced her. She stared at him, trying to read his expression, but his mask had slipped again. For the first time, she saw not the ruthless millionaire, not the cold ex-fiancé, but a man worn thin by years of fighting battles he couldn't win. And in that moment, she realized something dangerous. Maybe she wasn't just surviving his world anymore. Maybe she was changing it. The guests drifted back inside, leaving them in silence once more. Emma pulled her hand free gently. I need air. Alex nodded, though his gaze lingered. Don't disappear. Oh. She pushed through a side door and found herself in the garden. Lanterns glowing along the stone path, the night air cool against her flushed skin. She exhaled, tilting her head back toward the stars. For a brief moment, the whispers and chandeliers and poisoned smiles felt far away. But the sound of the door behind her reminded her this night wasn't finished. She turned, half expecting Alex. Instead, it was Caroline, eyes glinting, her voice low and vicious. You think you've won tonight? You've only made enemies you can't afford. Emma's heart pounded, but she didn't move. Caroline stepped closer, her perfume suffocating. Mark my words, Maid. When this night is over, I'll make sure you regret ever stepping into my world. And Emma, though fear rippled through her, lifted her chin. Maybe it was never your world to begin with. The threat hung between them like thunder waiting to break. The garden smelled of roses and damp stone, lanterns swaying in the breeze as if they too were holding their breath. Emma stood firm, though her pulse raced in her throat. Caroline's words still echoed like venom. Tomorrow, you'll wake up in your little maid's room, and all of this will vanish. But Emma had managed a reply, soft, steady, sharper than she intended. At least I'll still be myself. Can you say the same? For the first time that night, Caroline's mask cracked. Her painted smile slipped, her eyes narrowing into something vicious. But before she could release the words coiled on her tongue, the garden doors creaked again. Alex stepped into the night. His black tuxedo cut a stark figure against the glow, his gaze sweeping across the two women. His jaw tightened the moment he saw Caroline. Caroline, he said evenly, voice cold as steel. The guests are waiting. She straightened, her mask snapping back into place. Don't worry, she purred, though her voice shook slightly. I'll return to them. But when this night is over, Alex, you'll regret siding with the help. She brushed past him in a whirl of silk and perfume, leaving the garden doors swinging in her wake. Emma finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands trembled at her sides, though she fought to still them. Alex turned to her, his brow furrowed. What did she say to you? Emma forced a shrug. Nothing I haven't heard before. That I don't belong. That none of this matters. His gaze sharpened. She's wrong. Emma gave a bitter laugh, low and tired. Is she? Because when tonight ends, I'll go back to folding sheets and polishing silver while she wakes up in silk sheets surrounded by applause. Alex stepped closer, his voice steady but softer now. And yet tonight, you've stood taller than anyone in that ballroom. You made them listen. You did what I couldn't. Well, Lou. Emma turned her eyes toward the lanterns flickering along the stone path. Don't turn me into something I'm not. I'm not your statement. I'm not a weapon against Caroline. I'm just me. Alex's voice lowered. That's exactly why they can't fight you. You speak without an agenda. You stand without armor. And that terrifies them. Her chest tightened. For a moment, silence pressed between them, filled only by the distant hum of violins from the ballroom. She hugged her arms around herself, her voice trembling though her chin lifted. "You don't understand what it costs me," she whispered. "Every word I speak in there feels like walking barefoot on glass. One slip, and I'll bleed in front of them all." Alex's eyes softened. "Then I'll make sure you don't slip." Her breath caught. She turned to face him fully, searching his expression for the cold arrogance she'd come to expect. But it wasn't there. For once, his mask had fallen. She saw exhaustion, regret, something dangerously close to sincerity. Emma's heart thudded painfully. She stepped back to create space, trying to steady herself. "This isn't real, Alex. Tonight, all of this, it's theater. I play a part, you play yours. That's it." "Maybe it started that way," he admitted quietly. "But it doesn't feel like an act anymore." The words hung between them like thunder waiting to break. Emma opened her mouth, but the garden doors creaked again. A waiter hurried into the lantern light, bowing slightly. "Mr. Montgomery, the investors are waiting for your introduction." Alex's jaw flexed. He glanced at Emma, reluctant. "I'll be quick. Stay here. Don't let anyone corner you." Emma nodded, forcing a thin smile. "Go. I'll manage." He hesitated a moment longer, then turned and disappeared back inside, leaving Emma alone under the lantern glow. The garden suddenly felt colder. She rubbed her arms, staring up at the dark sky peppered with faint stars. For a fragile moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to imagine slipping away down the stone path and never returning to the ballroom. But shadows moved at the far edge of the garden. Emma stiffened. From the darkness, Caroline's mother emerged, pearls glinting in the lantern light like tiny teeth. The older woman's expression was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of an unspoken threat. "You've embarrassed my daughter," she said, her voice sharp but quiet, each word cutting through the night air. "You've embarrassed this family. Do you think there won't be consequences?" Emma's throat tightened, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Consequences exist for everyone, even your family." The woman's lips curved in disdain. "Careful, girl. You're nothing more than a passing scandal. By morning, society will laugh at you. By next week, you'll be forgotten." "Oh." Emma lifted her chin. "Then at least I'll be forgotten for telling the truth, not for hiding behind lies." The older woman's face darkened, her pearls catching the light as she leaned closer. "You're playing with fire, and fire always burns." Emma's fear trembled inside her, but she didn't look away. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped being afraid of burning." For a long beat, neither moved. The garden held its breath. Then Caroline's mother gave a sharp, dismissive laugh, turning back toward the mansion. "You'll learn soon enough," she said, vanishing into the glow of chandeliers and laughter. Emma remained rooted to the stone path, the lanterns flickering around her. Her heart hammered, her palms slick, but her back stayed straight. Tonight, she realized, she hadn't just been dragged into Alex's fight with Caroline. She had declared her own war. And this time, she wasn't going to fight it quietly. The garden door slammed behind Caroline's mother, and silence draped itself over the lantern-lit path. Emma stayed rooted, her pulse pounding against her ribs. Her words still lingered in the night air. Then maybe it's time someone stopped being afraid of burning. She hadn't meant to sound so defiant, but the truth had poured out of her, and for once she hadn't tried to swallow it back. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling, but not from fear anymore, from release. For years she had cleaned and scrubbed in silence, swallowing insults, living small so she wouldn't be noticed. Tonight, under chandeliers and cruel eyes, she had finally spoken. The garden door creaked open again. This time, Alex's footsteps approached quickly, his voice low and urgent. "Emma." She turned to face him, her chest still tight. "You shouldn't be here. They'll be looking for you." "They can wait," he said firmly. His eyes scanned her face, lingering on the tension in her jaw, the stubborn lift of her chin. "What happened?" Emma shook her head. "Nothing new. Just more reminders that I don't belong, that this is their world, not mine." Alex stepped closer, his voice sharper. "They're wrong." She let out a shaky laugh. "Are they? Because when this night ends, I'll go back to mopping floors and they'll go back to their palaces. That's reality, Alex." His gaze softened. "Reality isn't what they say it is. Tonight, you stood in their world, and they couldn't silence you. That's reality too." Emma looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to survive the night." "And yet, you did more," Alex said quietly. "You reminded me, and everyone in there, that truth matters more than appearances." The garden fell into silence again, filled only by the muffled music drifting from the ballroom. Emma's heart thudded painfully. She didn't know how much of his words were real, and how much was performance. But for the first time, she wanted to believe him. "Alex," she whispered, "why did you bring me here? Really?" He didn't look away. "At first, to prove a point, to show Caroline she hadn't broken me, to have anyone stand beside me." He paused, his voice lowering. But somewhere between the stares and the laughter, it stopped being about her. Emma's breath caught. His eyes burned into hers, and for a moment, the distance between Millionaire and Maid seemed to blur. Before she could answer, the ballroom doors burst open. The master of ceremonies called loudly, "Mr. Montgomery! The toast!" Alex exhaled, his jaw tightening. He looked at Emma once more. "Stay with me." She hesitated, then nodded. "Always." Together they walked back into the ballroom. The chatter dulled instantly, every gaze snapping toward them. Caroline stood near the stage, her smile brittle, her fingers clenched around her champagne flute. The room buzzed with anticipation. Alex took the microphone, his voice steady. "Tonight, we celebrate a union. But weddings are not only about promises between two people, they're about truth. And the truth is, appearances deceive us. Wealth can vanish, power can crumble, but dignity belongs to those who never let others strip it away." He turned then, offering his hand to Emma. "And tonight, one person reminded me of that." Gasps rippled across the hall. Emma froze, her heart hammering. Alex extended the microphone toward her. The weight of the room pressed down again. But this time she didn't falter. She took the mic, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength. "I am a maid. I clean floors. I fold laundry. That's true. But tonight, I was reminded that titles don't define us. What defines us is how we choose to stand when the world tells us to bow." "No?" The silence was thick, almost unbearable. Then applause began. Soft at first, then louder, swelling until it echoed against the cathedral ceiling. Guests rose to their feet, some clapping reluctantly, others passionately. The tide had shifted. Caroline's face burned crimson, her glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. She spun away, her perfect mask destroyed. Emma lowered the mic, her chest heaving. She glanced at Alex, who was watching her with something raw in his expression, something real. Without thinking, he took her hand. "Emma Carter is not just my maid," he said, his voice carrying over the applause. "She is the person I respect most in this room, and if that offends anyone here, so be it." The ballroom roared. Applause, gasps, flashes from cameras. Emma felt dizzy, her heart torn between fear and exhilaration. She wasn't invisible anymore. As the noise swelled, Alex leaned close. His words meant only for her. "You changed everything tonight." Emma's eyes shimmered. "No, Alex. I just told the truth." He smiled then, not the cold smirk of a man hiding behind arrogance, but something open, something rare. For the first time, Emma saw him not as the untouchable millionaire, but as a man capable of being changed. The night ended not with silence, but with thunderous applause. Emma stood beside Alex, her hand in his, the maid who had walked into a battlefield and left with her head high. And though tomorrow she might return to scrubbing floors, tonight she had proven something that no amount of money could erase. That true worth is not measured in wealth, but in courage. And in that truth, she was no longer invisible.